Hello and welcome to another episode of the World Class Real Estate Podcast. My name is Morrell and today the gang are back together. It's been a little while, but how are we, chaps?
Sam?
Good. Yeah, very good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, good. It's good to be all three of us on. I'm looking forward to an episode with a guest and all three because my OCD is a bit funny about like the triangle placement on Zoom of where the cameras are.
This is horrendous, isn't it?
Yeah, it really messes with me. So
how does
for
Mark
that
get in the
reason
middle?
alone.
Is Mark in the middle on yours too?
No, you're bottom middle on mine. I'm top right, Mark's top left. So yeah, it really messes with me.
Yeah, you're bottom middle on mine, but I quite like that because I think your background is set up the best. So I'm a little bit jealous, even though I've got the new background going on. So how are you, Sam? What have we missed other than a new child?
Yeah, having a kid. That's been my life. Nappies, not sleeping very much, plenty on work-wise. It's been all right.
Good.
Juggling. Yeah, that is the thing, isn't it? For the modern day man, is juggling business, nappies, household related chores, and
golf. It's hard.
It's tough life.
Yeah.
But we got sunshine over in the UK. Obviously, the Olympics month as well. So a lot of good topic of conversation about the Olympics with clients at the moment. Everyone seems to be watching it. So I'd imagine the same. Australia obviously great in the Olympics as well, Sam.
Yeah, we get it from like 7 p.m. till 7 a.m. every day. So it's sort of like get the kids into bed, have some dinner, sit next to your wife quietly for 20 minutes until the newborn wakes up, and then watch more Olympics while she does the rest, and then go to bed.
That's funny because I didn't think the Aussies liked sport that much. So really surprised.
It's a new thing for us. It's a new thing for us. Yeah. We only like the first week. When athletics starts, we're out. So swimming, surfing, hockey, canoeing, like anything to do with water, we're good at. And then when it starts to be the land-based activities, we're cooked.
Fair enough. So, Mark, I wonder if you're finding the same thing. I'm sure agents will relate, but it seems like as soon as the summer holidays kicked in, all solicitors just disappeared. Like everyone's do not disturb on their office now, on their office email. Seems like they've all just gone, no, we're out.
Yeah, we're recording the intro once again after the interview, which seems to be the way these days. But this is going to be a really good episode if people are feeling that, I think, because actually the transaction times are a challenge at this time of year, not only because of solicitors, but you're exactly right, but also client holidays. So buyer and seller are away, they can't complete. It means that sometimes you've got to plan a long way in. So yeah, summer holidays bring a challenge to try and keep the pipeline moving. And also we've found our phones have got a little bit quieter. But I don't mind that because actually it gives us an opportunity to be much more proactive. And we've probably gone through a phase as a business where we've not been able to do that. So, yeah, definitely finding that solicitors are away, clients are away, and you've got to be on it if you want to keep the pipeline moving. Would be my take on that. But do you want to tell us a little bit about Luke before we introduce today's guest, and then let's dive in and introduce him.
Yeah, I mean, Luke's got so many different variety of skills. He spent the last 10 years working in property. He was one of the kind of like contact centre head honchos at the Romans Leaders Group in his early part of his career. So he's seen big corporate business from a high level. He then moved away and worked with HMOs in commercial and residential property investing. He was then kind of cherry picked by a Singapore family and became an acquisitions director for them, looking at all sorts of buildings and investments across the globe, actually. He then kind of moved into the surveying world, business development surveying world. And in this year, he's actually started his own firm called Survey Network, which is working with a lot of estate agents and doing a lot of different UK-led buildings as well. So I would say as well, Luke is one of the best kind of business revenue creators I've ever seen. His ability to find business is phenomenal. So he's definitely going to add some value, not just around surveying, but agency too, because he always looks at it from the client's eyes. So yeah, great guest to get on, and looking forward to the episode, actually, gents.
Yeah, let's dive in and introduce him.
Luke, welcome to the podcast. And you are you're actually the first guest that we've had on with all three of us. So don't feel too ganged up, Luke, but you've got all three of us hosting this one. So
it's going to get loud.
It's going to get loud and ranty, maybe, as we were talking off camera just a minute ago. So how are you anyway, bud?
Yeah, no, really good. Yeah, no, thank you for having me. It's a bit like going for a corporate job interview, isn't it? Especially nowadays with the modern world of Zoom. Get about 74 people for phase one of your 92-stage job interview.
Yeah, well, the company you'd want to work for, I reckon.
Yeah.
Well, that's a change. You're selling it to me rather than having to sell yourself.
We'll have to try and avoid talking over each other. I was about to say that, and then I almost talked over Sam, so apologies. But Luke, we'll start the podcast before we get deep into surveys and what have you. Let's just talk estate agency in general, and what does world-class estate agency look like to Luke Masters?
I think there's a few things, but I think it predominantly comes down to awareness and problem solving. If you're aware that you are very much the start of that potential transaction and you're there at the end, but there are so many people that you need to coax, liaise with, try and not get overly frustrated with throughout the entire transaction, which could be a 6-month process, 9-month process involving 15, 20 people, depending on how many links in a chain there are. I think you need to be very aware of who you're dealing with, who's involved in the transaction, setting the expectations for what needs to happen in that transaction to everyone very, very early, and being a great problem solver, because without being a great problem solver, I don't think that any transaction has the best chance that it should do to go through if the agent controlling it isn't a great problem solver.
I haven't been on for a couple of weeks, so I'm going to try and do all my talking at the start while people are still listening. Luke, we've done a lot of these episodes, and no one has given that answer. In 250, however many episodes, no one has talked about the awareness of everything else that goes on around and the people that are involved, and prefacing that up front. So my question to follow that up is, who taught you that, or did you learn that the hard way?
I worked for a family who were very heavily involved in property, in residential, commercial, both in European markets, UK, Scotland, also Singapore, Asia, a bit in America. And they actually they poached me from a high street agent. At the time, I was still very young. But one of the first things they taught me was actually while I was trying to transact with them, they were trying to buy something from me, and they grilled me really over everybody that was involved in the transaction. They wanted to know what the mortgage brokers were like, what banks people were using, what solicitors were like, what their reputation was, who were they dealing with in the firm. And they almost gave me a rating and said, I want to buy this asset, but I reckon it's got a 60% chance of going through. And I was like, what do you mean it's got a 60% chance of going through? And then they spoke through it back with me and just educated me really to say, the transaction's only ever going to be as smooth as the worst person within it. And that could be the buyer, the seller, the agent, the broker, the bank. It doesn't really matter. But the transaction's speed and certainty will have a direct correlation to the weakest influence on that transaction.
It's a great way of kind of looking at it, isn't it? It really is, because there's so many different percentages that you kind of add up on that score sheet in a transaction that you could then look at and go, right, yeah, there's a 50% chance, 70% chance, 60% chance in this case of that transaction being smooth. It's such a great way of just analytically looking at it.
It's methodical. It's great.
Yeah, really good.
You can come back.
I don't think there's very many estate agents that would think about it like that. But actually, we talk in our business about professional partners, and that kind of links in seamlessly to why Luke's here to talk about surveys today. But actually, how many estate agents go into the level of detail that Luke just talked about for every person in the chain? And you said 60%. Statistically in this country, it's 70% on average. So there will be a lot of those transactions as the chain gets longer, and you've got a few weak parties in that chain, then you will have that percentage falling through. So what did you do before we start to talk about surveys? What did you do to try and increase the 60% when you were then working in agency, Luke? How did you try and get the right professional partners and make sure that the weakest link in the chain is kept ticking over, if you will?
It's I mean, yeah, we're going back, I don't even know, probably 10 years, something like that. And it was at the point where I had a little bit more freedom to decide who I dealt with. Obviously, at the point where you're being dictated to who you need to deal with, it's very difficult. Apart from passing feedback in a junior role in a company, it's difficult to have influence over that. But once I could start to make my own decisions around things, it's speaking to, and obviously this is another thing in agency which is very frowned upon, but speaking to other agents locally and going, who was great as a solicitor, and getting that feedback. And obviously speaking to other agents is relatively taboo in the agency world, especially high street agency. And taking advice from them is even worse, apparently. I think it's a little bit archaic, but taking advice from other people, getting feedback from other people around, okay, whoever you worked with in the last 6 months who's outperformed your expectations or who's gone above and beyond to assist you, and then essentially compiling a black book and just giving people the realistic feedback to say, we've dealt with this solicitor's firm and this was the result. I sent them 42 chases. Their average response time to an email was 7 days. Their average response to a telephone call was 4.5 days. Unfortunately, the transaction either took much longer than we're trying to transact this one in, or it didn't go through at all. You're more than welcome to use them, but I have got option B, C, and D, which all have proven track records of similar properties, similar situations, and achieving something that meets your expectations. But obviously, to do that, you need to understand what the client's expectation is. If they want to move in 3 months, you've got to find a team of consultants that can get you that done. But again, everybody needs to be quite transparent at the start about what's realistic and what they can do, and not just say yes to an instruction or a piece of work for the sake of saying yes to it. Because if you do, you'll say yes to it once, but you won't get a second. Well, certainly from myself, you wouldn't have got a second piece of work, because it would have been, I set a really clear expectation. I set really clear parameters around what I expected from you. You've fallen at the first hurdle. This isn't sort of, oh, let's not worry about it, because as an agent, you're getting paid when it transacts. So you're getting paid. So from a selfish perspective, that's a priority. But also, why did that person have you in their living room in the first place? Well, they wanted the transaction to go through. They didn't call you out for a chat and a coffee and to give you a couple of biscuits. Do you know what I mean? They called you out with a purpose. If you can't achieve that purpose, you've kind of failed on the premise that you were ever invited into their home in the first place.
Yeah, I think there's so many good agents that harp on the statistic of how many houses get listed versus how many sold, and I don't think it can be overstated. Like, anyone can list a property, right? Particularly in the UK, right, with it, no licensing, no regulation, no nothing. You can just decide that you're an estate agent. Get things set up, put a signboard out the front, and hope for the best. Being able to actually say, and I think that the dialogue you use there of "I'm here for a reason," it's like, you probably called me for a reason. Right, so we need to walk through the steps and the relationships and the awareness, coming back to your earlier point, of what is actually required to get you to the point of completion. Because anybody you talk to today can put a sign out the front. Not everyone else is going to get you through to the end. So this is the most important thing we're going to talk about today. and then go from there. Setting it up like that, other agents are going to do that. They're going to give them a price that's like likely inflated and give them a fee that's the opposite.
And it's probably no wonder why, compared to other international markets, and of course it's always going to be stressful, but moving home is rated as one of, if not the most stressful thing in the UK.
Yeah,
it's because there's no certainty. There's just everything's uncertain, and you can't control any part of the transaction unless you have somebody proactively working to mitigate and control as many of the factors as they can.
Mm.
It's it's not like international markets where it's right, this has been secured at this price, on this premise, on this basis, and it's going to transact in X number of days. And largely speaking, that is exactly what happens. If you send memos in the UK with that on, people just skim read it and file it in one of their email folders and go, yeah, well, we don't need to do that, do we? I mean, that's wishful thinking. And you think, no, that's literally the expectation. It's not wishful thinking. It's literally what I'm asking you to do.
Luke, with the way that you've spent your career, kind of from the traditional agent, couple of years working at a traditional big agent, a very good agent as well, and then you've moved kind of into this role as like an acquisitions director for these big kind of multi-millionaire people, where you're dealing with blocks of buildings. And I know you've dabbled in new build developments yourself, and bought and sold your own developments and sold your own new builds. When you've moved from normal residential market to this high profile purchasing commercials and flats and developments, was it quite eye-opening for you, going from this is how traditional agency works and then the leap into that? Was it quite eye-opening how different it was? And is there any kind of good lessons that you could share with agents that want to just move into a next level, or just think of things slightly different to just the standard 300 grand house transaction that goes through day by day?
I think a lot of agents are getting on board with what was being done 8-10 years ago, but in sort of commercial acquisitional markets. But you pick the right people, you pay the money for those people if you want it to happen, because you're paying for a degree of certainty, despite the fact nobody can guarantee anything. You're paying for a degree of certainty. But one of the things we used to do was the memos used to be super clear. They would be issued to basically anybody that touched the transaction. So it would be, I don't know, the mortgage broker, the finance broker for, I don't know, like a commercial development loan or just a commercial acquisition or purchase. They'd get a copy of the memos that would have, this is what's happening, this is the dates it needs to happen, this is why it needs to happen, this is how it needs to happen. And quite often, right at the very start, and this is probably going back to more days of Skype rather than Zoom where we are today, but they would invite everybody to a Skype call. So you'd have seller's lawyer, seller's financial advisor or accountant, or VAT advisor if the building was VAT registered. Then you'd have purchaser's advisor, purchaser solicitor, financial advisor, all on a Skype call. And they would just go through the memos line by line and just thrash it out. And if anybody had any questions, queries, or things they thought were unrealistic, you found out about it on day one, not 3 weeks down the line when someone goes, oh, that was never realistic. Well, yeah, okay, great. Well, and it just helped to keep everybody accountable, but also built a little bit of rapport in the transaction, which really helped, because you had the buyer and seller's team that had a professional interaction, but nonetheless had an interaction. So they had a little bit more professional courtesy when Dan's chasing Tom.
When that email came through that everyone reads,
exactly,
stern email. Realistically, it's like, oh no, they're just asking a question because I understand how they speak and operate because I met them for that 15 minutes or whatever.
Exactly, and there was a lot of obviously you need your own professional advice that needs to sit separate to sort of a group transaction, but we'd have there'd be almost like weekly minute updates that would go out to everyone. They'd just go out and they'd say, our understanding is this has happened, this has happened, this has happened, this has happened, we're waiting on this, and this. Circulate to anybody. Please provide feedback or comments if any of the above is not accurate. And it just keeps people accountable all the time, because it's some people might not like it, don't get me wrong, because essentially your dirty laundry is getting aired if you haven't done something that you said you're going to do the previous week. But that's where there's so many people in transactions. That was then how one of the best ways we found of really flushing out stuff that wasn't being done, because you're getting that sort of weekly snapshot of, coming back to the earlier point, who's your weakest performer, because you can see it, because it's the person that consistently week on week isn't doing what they said they're going to do.
Yeah, very simple.
Hasn't quite achieved it. So you can just apply a bit more pressure and just be a little bit more regular contact with that person and just go, obviously I know we're going to catch up again on Friday. However, just thought I'd check in with you on Wednesday. Has that been done yet? Oh no, sorry, thanks for reminding me. And you just have to, again, be a great problem solver and just adapt yourself to positively influence the transaction. And if somebody needs a bit more encouragement and a bit more prodding, that's what you need to do.
I think you made a point before about there's not that much you can control in a transaction, so you've got to make an effort to do what you can. And then you talk about steps you can take to positively make a mark and actually keeping things moving, or ideally setting things up from the start. I think that's a really good segue into what you do now, and that's surveys. And we were having a little rant beforehand about when's the right time to get a building survey done or anything like that. So, Mark, I know you got a few questions on this. I just like hearing, how can you positively impact the transaction? How can you keep control? I thought that was a good time to sort of bring it back to, well, there's probably a few things that you could do that maybe is a bit weird to talk about up front, but actually becomes very professional and makes a hell of a lot of sense.
Yeah, we were talking off air about some of the differences between Australia and the UK, well, the English and Welsh housing market. So before we go to Luke, Sam, just walk us through how surveys work in Oz and some of the differences there. And then maybe Luke can interject with how maybe we could just take some of those ideas to try and positively influence the transaction in this country.
Well, I think the important point to preface is that it's what I'll describe as best practice. Doesn't happen all the time. So I would say in more than 50%, certainly in Brisbane, I know it is different for other states, but we have a lot of old wooden houses and very moist atmospheres. So there's lots of termites, so everyone's freaking out. So they take a bit of extra effort up front. The seller will buy, pay for, and display what we call a building and pest inspection, which is a builder who is licensed goes and checks the dwelling itself, and then they'll also do a pest inspection to make sure there is or isn't damage, there isn't even live termites for the most part, but insects, bugs, problems. If a property is being sold by auction, it would be very rare for it not to have an inspection ahead of time that then could be assigned to the purchaser. And in most cases, it just helps understand that property at a deeper level. If we're buying and they don't provide one, there's a lot of questions as to why. Some people just don't do it because they can't afford it, even though it's only a few $100s. Other people don't do it because there's problems that they want to hide and they're just happy to negotiate at the end of the process. But it does build confidence in not just the property, but the price that you will pay for that property. It sharpens offers, because if there's one that we are more than willing to be satisfied with, we don't have to have that clause in our offer, which makes us look like a way better buyer than someone who might still just want to do it on their own and doesn't give that seller any certainty. So for the most part, it is done up front. It's accepted best practice. Sellers understand that it's a good investment of their money to find a better buyer to achieve a premium price. But it doesn't happen all the time. We were sort of saying before this that it rarely happens in England. It has to happen in markets in Scotland. Like, you cannot sell a property. Like, I don't think you can actually list a property on a Scottish portal without it. In Norway, you can't sell a house without. I remember going and staying in an Airbnb while we were like touring around Oslo. We stayed with this chick who was trying to sell her property. And she was like, yeah, it cost me like 8,000 NOK or whatever it is, which is probably like 50 quid. Because she had to go and get the contract, she had to get a valuation, she had to, like, the government had to tell her the price, like the most she could sell her money for a property for, get a full building report, full building survey, everything, roof, whatever, and it was just provided to everybody who inquired, and it was like, yeah, I'll pay that price or I won't. Which maybe takes some of the skill out of negotiating and marketing and puts a ceiling on what you could achieve, but it certainly was a lot easier for a buyer to navigate, and properties transacted there in like 2 weeks. So yeah, I think there's lessons from those three examples that England could definitely rely on and work on, but it is going to come down to the listeners of this show and everyone else who doesn't to take the first step and be on the front foot and explain to their clients or their potential clients and risk losing a listing because they're asking for money up front, how important it is and why it will contribute to a sale, not just a listing. Does that make sense?
Because people typically, Luke, in the UK, they're in England, estate agents quite scared of surveys. Do you find that with Survey Network, when you and Ollie are kind of talking to clients, do you find that the agents, when you're booking it in, they're a bit nervous about a survey?
Probably 50% of the time, yes. And 50% of the time it's because, again, stuff hasn't been set up right at the start. Somebody hasn't been educated about the process, and it's probably Monday, and the buyer's probably supposed to be exchanging on Friday, and we've now been called to do a survey. So, I mean, if I was sat in their shoes, I'd be nervous because it's almost got to the point of completion and then there's a new hurdle. So whether or not it's going to raise any issues is kind of irrelevant. It's just the goalposts have moved. So I think that creates unsettling uncertainty for agents. But I don't know. I mean, I know we just mentioned risking losing transactions and risking losing listings, Sam, but I think they lose more, or certainly from what I've seen, they lose more certainly from a financial perspective. If you look at the whole cost of a transaction, they lose more by not advising somebody that the property's in a condition where it would be the best thing to do to get a survey up front, because the house could be worth somewhere between 500,000 and 600,000, but there's clearly work to do. I'm an agent. I don't know how much work there is to do. So therefore, I don't actually know the best marketing price until I know what needs.
Yeah, the reality of the property. Yeah, for sure. I think you do it on the ones like maybe not necessarily on a new build where it's got a builder's warranty or something like that. But if you walked into any home that could have been built 10 years ago or 100 years ago and it was in fantastic condition, for me, if I'm sitting there putting my sales hat on, and again, we do this while we were selling, we were getting building and pests on properties 15 years ago, right? It was, this is going to help you get a better price. This will build confidence in the market. We can tell everybody, survey provided on inspection or on inquiry, whatever it will be, right? Suddenly, everyone reads that and they go, oh, that's worth a look. More inquiry, more viewings, more offers, better price. All for the sake of getting this thing done up front. And I think my point about losing the listing there is anytime an agent introduced something new, like you got to remember when Rightmove came out, people didn't talk about it because they were scared of losing listings because it was just like everyone's so used to going in the newspaper. And then the next thing came out and no one talked about it because everyone was scared of losing listings because you just put it on Rightmove. And then the next thing came out or whatever it would be, right? So this is just the thing that's always been around. Hundreds of years. People have been going and looking at houses being like, I don't think that's going to fall over. Now it's a little bit more serious. There's a little bit more insurance involved, right? It's a bit more formal. You got more choice. Some good, some excellent, some probably just a couple of dodgy blokes called Barry rocking up, having a look at it. It's just the thing that they don't want to talk about because it's new and it's uncomfortable. And when you put it's like asking for marketing money up front. Like Ian and I have had some passionate rants about that in our time. No one wants to do it because it's another reason that someone will say no because everyone else didn't offer it. And they're like, we'll get going today. We'll take our own photos. There's no investment. You pay us 1% at the end. So it's how do you work that into your pitch, into your presentation, so that it presents you as the most professional option that also happens to guarantee getting the most money regardless of what you pay. You made a good point before. If you want things done, you pay for it. Right? I want this done smoothly. This is what those services are going to cost. Real estate's the opposite. It's like, what have I got to say and do to win this business, even though there's no guarantee of actually ever recouping my fee? If I set it up wrong at the start, people are just so obsessed with getting the piece of paper signed and be like, look, I got one. Woohoo! It just sits there.
I just find it so bizarre because I think, yes, you'll lose listings. You'll lose listings in living rooms, in meetings, in pitches. Excuse me. Wow, my voice has just gone.
There'll be listings that you probably shouldn't want. Right? That's the thing. It's it's catching that. The upfront marketing fee, the upfront front loading of various elements, including the legal bit and potentially the survey, will be those transactions that you want because they'll be the transactions that complete, because we all want to work with motivated sellers, right?
I think as well on the point of what you lose, it's remembering. So in terms of for the seller, the marketing price that you go on the portals for is not necessarily the price you're going to get when the result is done on completion. And also for agents in England, I'm very aware that the best of the best across agency is 60% conversion rate on valuation to listing, 60% conversion rate on sale, on listing to sale. That's the best of the best as an average. If you've got a valuer on a 60-60, you pay the big bucks for that valuer because they're top draw. Well, it's still 40% on one part and then another 40% on the next part. Whereas if you could get a seller on a 1980s house to just have the survey done, realise that there's X, Y and Z that needs doing, that's going to cost £7,000. That's why it's being marketed. As an agent on a viewing, to supply that to a buyer is going to give so much more certainty, is a word we've used a lot, and confidence, that it's just going to make everything in terms of difficult questioning happen up front before me as the agent then spends the next 3 or 4 months doing the hard work to get the call on Monday for the exchange on Friday to go, oh no, it's all going to go wrong. Like, it just makes so much sense, doesn't it? I can't see how it doesn't make sense, Luke.
It is exactly that. And that's what, I suppose it comes back to what we said earlier, setting the expectation up front. If you're sitting down with that seller and saying, as we said before, you've called me here for a reason, presumably you want to sell or you want to move, whatever it is, you want to transact out of this asset. So the best way of having certainty is for me to have the most information about the asset up front, therefore be able to give you the most confidence about what the marketing price should be. And I can invest my time wholeheartedly knowing that I'm not going to spend 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever it may be, 12 weeks, working the market, trying to get you the best offer, trying to get the most proceedable buyer that meets your timescales, meets your expectations, meets everything else. But then it all falls down with, yeah, I did tell you it was worth 600 when I sat in the living room, but now we've had the survey done, it's about 70 grand's worth of work to do. So, yeah, I mean, the most we can sell it for is 530. Well, unfortunately, you've done it the wrong way around, because if you had the survey done up front, said to them it's worth between here and here, then got the survey result, then said, okay, 530, 550, that's roughly where it is, marketed it accordingly, And therefore, if the person's transacting on, they can base their decision around that. They can make an informed decision about, okay, well, I can look at this. I can look at that, but I can't look at this. If you sit down with them and just say, yeah, I know there's a few pretty bad cracks in this house, or yeah, it does look like it's moving a bit, but I'm going to give you the top end of the value. And then they start basing their entire life decisions for them, their family, and everybody else around a number that you're not fully informed to be able to give. And in fact, you're not actually confident about, because you've seen those things and you think, yeah, this could all go a little bit Pete Tong in the survey, but we'll stick 600 on it. You're going to spend 6 months working on something to potentially not get paid. The seller is going to have a very negative view of you by the end, because they're going to say, well, you told me this. Now you're telling me this. If you set any relationship or transaction up right at the start, it's got a half decent chance of success. If you don't, it's a whim and a prayer most of the time.
When you put it like that, it's insanity, really. It makes a lot of sense. So can I ask a question then, Luke, in regards to surveys?
Yeah.
A couple of questions. How many clients do you meet where you are doing a survey for the seller before they've gone to market? And as Sam mentioned, in Australia, is it possible in this country to assign a survey to the buyer?
So, answer to question 1, how many do we do? It's probably, I reckon, this number's still very low, but it's becoming more common. It's probably variance month to month, but between 2 and 5%.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
It was probably 0%. And in fact, so unpopular that a lot of surveying firms don't even offer it as a service, because there's no market for it. So you've got to create the market for it by educating people. So if you do the education, you can create the market that then allows you to help people and have people better informed. But surveying is always seen as later down the process. So unless you're going to start thinking about how you can positively affect the transaction, you just accept that the deal's done by the time that you get called, and that's just the way the world works, which I don't really subscribe to. I'd rather we try and assist everybody in the home moving process, and ultimately the client, by educating them and better informing them. And then when it comes down to the second point, that's down to a company as far as their PI and their liability. So yes is the answer. Will a lot of companies do it? No, because they go, well, no, because you've got this standard and that standard, and then you're conflicted, and your PI is going to have an issue with this and that and the other. But in reality, there's absolutely no reason why it can't be assigned in a reasonable time frame. I mean, if we're talking
for a fee, because that's again, so the way that it works around like the professional indemnity and even public liability here is they've got to pay a fair fee.
Yeah,
and so the good inspectors is just like, I love it, mate. Like, I do the work once, I charge $700 for it, and then it's $250 a pop. If there's 6 bidders, I make more money from the assignment just in case they buy it. And like some agents will sell it to the people on the proviso that they're buying it. We'll buy it after we've bought it. But you're assigning the liability. And because there's a transaction, so money is taken, then the report is produced again. It's the same report from the same day that you did it, but the name of the client is different. So everyone's insured and everyone's covered.
Exactly. So you have to do that. To take the liability, you obviously have to transact, and like you said, at fair price. But so many people are just, again, UK property market's so archaic. Everyone's just so worried about doing anything. No one wants to get creative and try and push things forward, which, again, is something I don't like to subscribe to. Is, okay, we did a survey for the buyer 4 weeks ago because they were worried about X. This property is going to exchange in the next 6 weeks. Is there any reason why, as long as the buyer's happy that we inspected it, then they don't have any concerns with it? Is there any reason why they couldn't have reliance on this report if we were to reissue and sell it for a fair fee on a reassignment? No. Is the buyer happy with it, knowing that information? Yes.
That's the key thing. If they're happy with it and they follow your terms of, like, you create terms of reassignment, it's the same liability, it's the same insurance, you have the same remedy if we got something wrong. This is the fee. And whether it's the full fee or whether it's whatever it is, right? It just needs to be fair and reasonable. I think you're right to push the boat out. You're right to challenge those conventions. Like, the reason that there's not a market in it is because no one's pushing it and no one's talking to the people who can bring you that market, who are the estate agents. Everyone listening to this show, one, should give you a call, and two, should just work this, like, deeper level of, like, upfront due diligence into their listing process, because it will make a material difference in that. If you're selling 40 or 50% of what you're doing and a worldy agent sells 60%, start doing surveys up front and watch your percentage increase.
It's just good advice, isn't it, for the client? You know, it's not like it's some sort of crazy money-making scheme. It's just the right advice for certain clients with certain properties. That's the way I see it.
On both sides of the transaction. Like,
yeah,
get your seller understanding the nasties they don't know about, get you confident about your price, and get a buyer confident about actually paying it. Like, there's not much more.
It's almost like everyone's sat around the table looking at the same meal, rather than you look from different angles and it's all a different meal. And then all of a sudden you start to spin the table and you go, oh, yours is a bit different to mine. Yours is butchered and half eaten. That's not cooked properly. Do you know what I mean? It's just.
I think for the agent as well, when you're in the living room, bringing it back for some value for the guys and girls that are listening that think, I'd like to do this. I think normally in evaluation, you've typically got an upsize or a downsize or a sideways mover or area, whatever. You actually spend more of the time on the valuation, especially in the first half an hour, talking about what they're trying to achieve, i.e. the property they're trying to buy, where it is, what it is. You actually spend more time in the initial part of the valuation talking about their goal. And I would just ask the question, if you were viewing properties and some of them had already had a level 1 or 2 survey done so that you could see if there was any flare-ups, any issues, any costs, things that you would need to invest, would that make the viewing experience feel better for you prior to making an offer? And obviously that seller is going to say, yes, I'd much rather have more information up front. Well, why don't we do the same thing for your buyers on your property then?
Yep.
And that's kind of as simple as it probably needs to be in a conversation to get the framing of how people are thinking on point that's right for everyone, I would say. Really, Luke?
Yeah, I'd agree. It doesn't need to be for everything, but I think it just needs to be for, like we said, not brand new builds. You've got 10-year NHBCs and various warranties and all the rest of it. But if you're sat at a property thinking, oh, I hope this doesn't get a survey, as an agent, and get the survey up front, because then you know what you're dealing with at the start.
Yeah.
You're not worried about it blowing out later down the line. It really is that simple.
It's just courage, you know?
Yeah.
And professionalism. Simple as that.
Yeah, that's the mic drop for me. And I think if people are listening, and conscious I had a lot of your time here, Luke, and appreciate it, but I think if people are listening, have a chat with Luke, because he'll talk you through all of the different levels. He's happy to talk about things from Survey Network's point of view and everything. But also, I think knowing Luke would find business on a desert island on his own. The guy's probably the best BDM revenue creator I've ever seen in 20 years of doing agency. So he's worth having a chat with anyway as an estate agent for that reason alone too. So yeah, it's well worth kind of picking up the phone or dropping him a WhatsApp at Survey Network. So yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. Mark, Sam, any other questions for Luke before he runs off to check on his baby?
No, I'm good. I think for me, loads of key takeaways, and I think one of the big ones from Luke's perspective was you're paying for certainty, and I think that's going to ring true in my ears and hopefully the listeners' ears for a good while. So thank you.
Thank you, Luke.
Thank you very much for having me, all of you.
Cheers, Luke.
A massive thank you once again to Luke Masters from the Survey Network for joining us today. You said on the intro, Ian, about revenue generating and having a great knowledge about the transaction generally. And we didn't spend a great deal of time talking about surveys, actually. Fair play to Luke. I think there's loads of key takeaways that agents can use this episode to sit back and look at their process and think, right, how can it be improved? If you are looking to improve your process, there's loads in there that you've got to go at, in my opinion.
Yeah, 100%. I'm just all about trying to help estate agents make more money from transactions, try and make the industry better through getting money either up front or more certainty for the agent or a better conversion. And to do that, they need to do right by the client. They need to deliver a quality service. And I think this is one of the ways that people can do that. He's trying to build this market around getting the survey up front. We mentioned on the podcast, and Sam highlighted, it happens in Australia and other countries, Scotland, Norway, etc. It just seems right. It seems like the right thing to do. And I think with agents having that conversation in living rooms, it will make the conversion better, and less agents will spend 6 to 9 months of their lives trying to help a client transact and then get paid for nothing when it all bombs out because of something like maybe a survey, So that for me, I think is just such a great valuable point for people to take away and work out how they can implement in their business, really.
Yeah, I think for me, all of the things that we talked about, whether it was the language around that a really good agent brings awareness to the entire process of what actually and who actually needs to connect, through to a pretty unsexy, like I said this to a guy today, and I'll repeat it now because I think it was a good one-liner, but like the least sexy real estate is, the more successful you are, right? What is less sexier than a survey? But what is less important than a survey, right? Not much is less sexy, but there's a lot that's not as important. It is why so many deals fall over. So why not address that at the front? And why not use that as a tool that costs you nothing, that gives you leverage over potentially overinflated expectations, or helps you solidify those expectations and match the market's expectations to those because everything came back well, but ultimately something that will present you as a better professional to win that business over somebody who is just cutting fees and willing to take photos on the same day. I think just being able to, and it'll take practice if you've never done it before, but being able to communicate that to the people you're in front of will put you in that league of converting 6 out of 10 that you go for to then sell the 6 out of 10, hopefully more.
Yeah, and I think for me, there was loads in there, and I mentioned I love the paying for a good professional partner is paying for a degree of certainty, and that comes through if you're having those conversations with people about front loading some of the work, legal surveys. You're providing more certainty for yourself, but you're also providing more certainty for your buyer. And I loved your line. But one final thing just before we wrap, I just think the way Luke talked about getting people on a Zoom call and using a really detailed sales memorandum to set some expectations. They're not difficult things to do, but actually how many agents are doing that, and how many agents could implement that to stop sales falling over? It's really practical advice that people can go and implement immediately. And I would really encourage any listener to listen to the episode, get the colleagues to listen to the episode and find out how many bits of that can implement to just stop sales falling through. No one likes a sale falling through. And as you said right at the start of this little outro, Ian, the ability to make more money from estate agency is in this episode because you have less sales that fall over. I think that's huge.
Yeah, I think just a little link as well, where we've been talking a lot about reservations, getting a buyer to reserve the property and having some sort of commitment up front. If there was a survey there for the buyer to see on the viewing, I think more buyers would be prepared to commit to a reservation, and then everything is that much more locked up, and we're getting one step towards where ultimately the whole of the English market should be, and I think everyone wants it to be. So it's just linking these things together, and some agent will roll with it, market it, show that they do it, show that it works, and they will be the powerhouse. That's the key thing. So it's either you go through that kind of confidence and courage that Sam said to get to that point, or you get left behind when someone in your marketplace does it. that's the way I see it.
I think that was exactly my thoughts as we were talking through that. Buyer information pack, title deeds, any leasehold information, survey, fully informed on day one, much more chance of transacting.
Yeah.
Great stuff. A massive thank you once again to Luke from the Survey Network for joining us today. As you know, we do this because we love our industry. We want to see it improve and get better. If you have enjoyed today's episode, please share it out on social media, reach out to one of the four of us, and just give us some feedback on that. Hopefully that's been a really useful episode. I don't know how I'm going to do this now, three-way. I'm Mark, he's Ian, he's Sam. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you again next week.